The courtroom fell into a stunned silence as my sister, calm, composed, and dressed like she'd just stepped out of a federal hearing, rose from her seat and introduced herself not just as my lawyer, but as a sitting district judge. The HOA's smug attorney, who had been grinning moments earlier, went pale as she laid out a damning list of legal violations like a surgeon wielding a scalpel. I watched as the man who tried to seize my land over grass suddenly realized he'd picked a fight with the wrong family. But what happened next will shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. But first, let's go back to the beginning. The sun beat down hard that afternoon, baking the dry earth beneath my boots as I stood near the edge of the pasture, clutching the crumpled notice like it might dissolve if I let go. The wind stirred the grass lazily. Yes, some patches stood tall, untamed, but it wasn't a lawn. It was land. My land. And it had always been this way. My late wife, Emma, used to say the wild grass gave the hills character, made them feel like home. Now, some bureaucrat with a clipboard and a spreadsheet wanted to tell me my land was out of order. What stuck in my gut wasn't just the absurdity of the rule. It was the tone, the gall. Community Rule 17B. Like it had weight, like it belonged here. Hidden Meadows wasn't a community. It was a name that never existed until a few months ago. There had been no welcome letters, no flyers, no friendly knock on the door to explain the change. Just silence. Until this threat arrived, folded and stamped, like a snake slithering into a warm bed. Brad. I'll never forget his voice. Smug, dismissive. That nasal superiority of a man who'd never sweat through a single shirt fixing fence wire under the July sun. If you can't maintain it, maybe you shouldn't own it. I wanted to reach through the line and ask him what he knew about ownership, about burying your wife on the East Hill beneath a lone oak tree, because she loved the sound of wind chimes there, about fixing the barn roof with your own hands, plank by damn plank, about waking before dawn just to make sure the goats had enough hay to last through a cold snap. Instead, I sat at the kitchen table that night with the letter spread before me, the fluorescent light buzzing like an anxious thought. The clock ticked. Midnight passed. Still, I couldn't sleep. My hands were calloused from work, my heart heavier than it had been in years. Not from grief this time, but fury. Powerless, misplaced fury. They hadn't just crossed a line. They'd set fire to it. A man can take a lot. Loss, silence, solitude. But there's something sacred about land. Not just what it's worth, but what it means. And they were trying to tear that away, not with bulldozers, not yet, but with paper and ink and arrogance. That's when I knew this wasn't going to be a conversation. This was going to be a war. It started like a slow infestation. First the notice, then the cameras. The man they sent wasn't wearing a uniform, just a generic HOA windbreaker, like he worked for a pest control company or managed the back end of a golf course. But he moved like he had authority, walking along my property line with a clipboard and a Nikon, snapping photos like he was cataloging evidence for a trial. He took shots of my busted fence gate, my rust-streaked tractor that still ran just fine, and, God help me, even the goats. One of the nannies, June, bleated at him and trotted over. He backed up like she had teeth. She didn't, not really, just an old soul who liked company. I asked him what he was doing. He didn't answer, just nodded and moved to the other side of the yard. 2 mornings later, I heard a heavy diesel engine groan outside. I stepped onto the porch and watched a tow truck back itself halfway into my gravel driveway, chains clinking off its boom like warning bells. A young guy in an orange vest stepped out and gave me a sheepish wave. "Just doing my job," he said. "We got a request to remove a non-operational vehicle." I told him flat out, "She runs, every day." I walked right over, climbed into the old Ford, turned the key, and let her roar to life, muffler rattling like thunder off the hills. He left fast. That was when I realized this wasn't about grass anymore. This was a slow-rolling siege. They were trying to wear me down, erode my resistance with paperwork and scare tactics. One fine, one truck, one photo at a time. Death by 1,000 bureaucratic cuts. When I called the sheriff's office, I expected backup. What I got was a shrug. "HOA stuff's civil," the deputy said. "If they're not breaking in, it's not criminal." He offered me a name of a local attorney who deals with this kind of thing. Instead, I called Rachel. She didn't ask questions. She listened. And by nightfall, her black sedan crunched up my gravel drive, headlights cutting through the dusk. She walked in wearing slacks and a courthouse blouse, no makeup, hair pulled back tight, eyes already scanning the papers I had scattered on the dining room table. "This," she said after 10 minutes, "is predatory policy masquerading as governance. They're counting on you not knowing your rights. But they don't know me." For the first time in days, something stirred in me. Something steady, something fierce. Not rage, not fear, hope. Because I just remembered something they didn't know. I don't fight alone. The courthouse was one of those squat, sun-bleached buildings that looked like it hadn't changed since the 70s. Cracked flagstone steps, dusty blinds, and a busted vending machine humming in the hallway like a dying wasp. But to me, it felt like a battlefield. I'd put on my best denim shirt, pressed it flat, cleaned my boots. Rachel told me not to speak unless asked, but inside I was burning with anticipation. The HOA's lawyer, a man named Delton Briggs, walked in like he owned the place. Polished shoes, slicked back hair, grinning like he'd already banked the win. He barely glanced at me. To him, I wasn't a person. Just a name on a file he'd already decided belonged to a defeated man. He stood confidently as court came to session, his tone oily with fake politeness. "Your Honor, the Hidden Meadows Homeowners Association exercised its legal right to enforce maintenance standards under the Extended Community Zone policy, which was duly ratified by the HOA Board in accordance with Section 12A of our charter." He clicked his pen with theatrical flair and smiled. "Mr. Daniels is, regrettably, non-compliant." That was the last time he smiled, because when the judge looked over and asked if I had representation, Rachel stood, not like a showman, but like someone used to being listened to. Her voice didn't rise, didn't waver, it cut. "Your Honor, Rachel Mitchell, I'm here pro bono as counsel for my brother." There was a pause. You could feel the shift in the room, like the temperature dropped 10 degrees. Delton's smirk faded like a sunset behind storm clouds. Rachel opened the binder we'd built together, meticulously labeled, indexed, time-stamped. Every HOA letter, every photo, every recorded phone call, every map, every drone image, every clause of law they had twisted or ignored. Her voice was steady, surgical. The so-called annexation of Mr. Daniels' property failed to comply with open meeting statutes outlined under Texas Property Code 209.0051. No prior notice was issued. The new policy wasn't registered with the county clerk's office. Furthermore, the HOA levied punitive liens without judicial oversight or verified procedural consent. Delton tried to object. The judge waved him off. Then Rachel delivered the blow. "Your Honor, I am requesting a formal investigation into Hidden Meadows HOA for systemic abuse, fraudulent liens, and extortion under Civil Code FAR 384. We believe this HOA has weaponized policy to execute unlawful land grabs." The courtroom went still. No scribbling, no whispers, just silence, sharp and absolute. Even the bailiff looked over. I sat frozen, heart thundering like distant artillery. And for the first time since this all began, I knew we'd already won. They say justice moves slow, but when it finally arrives, it hits like a freight train. The judge's ruling came down with all the finality of a gavel slamming shut on an era. Every fine they'd stacked against me, erased. Every lien they'd filed, voided. The so-called annexation policy that gave them the illusion of control, frozen, stripped of authority, pending a full-scale investigation by the state, and it didn't stop there. Rachel's motion didn't just win our case, it lit a fuse. Within days, the state's Attorney General launched a sweeping audit of HOA operations across 3 counties. Turns out, Hidden Meadows wasn't just poking at me. They'd been quietly choking the life out of other property owners, too. 22 others, to be exact. Farmers, retirees, veterans, all of them hit with outrageous fines and veiled threats. Rachel had opened the floodgates, and the truth poured out. The HOA board collapsed like a house of cards. Their president resigned the same day the audit was released. Their treasurer pled the 5th in a deposition. And Brad? He wasn't smirking anymore. Fraud, unlawful harassment, conspiracy to falsify public records. He was hit with enough charges to keep him tied up in courtrooms for years. But it wasn't the paperwork or the press conferences that stayed with me. It was the quiet morning that followed. 2 months after the verdict, I stepped out onto my porch with a chipped mug of black coffee and looked out over the hills. The grass shimmered in the light, golden, tall, uncut. A 6-inch middle finger to every clipboard-wielding tyrant who thought they could dictate how a man lives on his own land. The goats bleated in the distance. The wind tugged gently at the worn flag over the barn. Peace, real peace, settled over the ranch like a soft quilt. Rachel stood beside her car, suitcase in hand. She hugged me tight, long, the way only someone who knows what it means to fight for something truly yours can. "No one messes with our family," she said into my ear. Later that week, I drove past a neighbor's fence and nearly ran off the road laughing. He'd painted a crude sign in red block letters, "Warning, this land protected by judge's brother." That's when I knew. This wasn't just about me. It wasn't even just about Hidden Meadows. It was about the idea that ordinary people, armed with truth and grit, could still beat the system. Because sometimes, the quiet ones fight hardest, and when they do, God help whoever's on the wrong side of the line.